Dear viewers of Baku Network, in today's edition we have a special guest, Ms. Mehra Malini, the CEO of the Global Legislators. Ms. Malini, welcome to Azerbaijan, to Parliament of Azerbaijan. Together with my colleague Sevil Mikailova, it is a great honor and privilege for us to hosting you today in the platform of Baku Network. Ms. Malini, your remarkable journey as an advocate, activist, leader in the matters of social justice, sustainability, climate action, inspired so many people, countless number of people across the globe. So together with my colleague, first of all, we would like to learn your experience. What first sparked your passion to become involved in these matters, in these issues, and what the aspects that drive you in your mission today? Because I know that these are very important matters, urgent matters that needs to be addressed, needs to be resolved. At the same time, these are the matters very interconnected and interrelated. And my second question would be, to start our conversation, would be your first impression about the COP29 session, which is taking place in Azerbaijan. This is the most important global event that we are hosting this year in Azerbaijan so far. Yes, we have organized many international events, conferences, but I think that the COP29 session conference, which is dedicated to the issues of the climate change, climate action, so it's very important that we address these issues, very urgent issues and very interrelated matters in Azerbaijan. So floor is yours. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much. I'm absolutely honored and privileged myself to be here in the Malini Mechlis and to be joining you for this conversation. So as you said correctly, I have been involved in the issues around sustainable development, social justice and action on climate change for a very long time. And for me, it really goes back to my college career. I went to university, to college in the United States, to a small liberal arts college, which was the first college in the world which offered women an education equivalent to the Ivy League of college. And so there my focus was very much on the status of women. So that was the focus of my academic work. And so throughout my life, I have always assessed a country by the status of its women. So that was my area of professional and my personal interest. I'm Indian, of course, and the other area that I was very interested in was in politics and political science and governance, how societies govern themselves and how they take on board major risks and address those risks through good systems, how societies are governed and how they respond to major risks, and how they do so in a way which is democratic, engaging the voices of the population. So those were my starting points. And then very early on in my career, I became involved in a lot of organizing for women's rights. So I was very taken in particular, at that time, this is the 1980s, the whole world was forming its understanding around the relationship between developing countries and developed countries, the role of women, the importance of ecological stewardship. So we had some major reports which had come out. The Brundtland Commission report came out. And then in the 90s, we started the international conferences, of which COP29 is the most recent. But the big one started in the early 90s. And the first major one was the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. So that was the UN Conference on Environment and Development. It was the first time that these issues of environment and development came together on the table. And so I was in university, I was very much observing, I was doing my master's, which was on gender and development. So we were all looking at what the outcome was going to be from the Rio Earth Summit. And of course, the Rio Earth Summit gave us the Rio Conventions. So this year, 32 years later, we now have the triple COP. We have climate, biodiversity, and desertification all in the same year. So my journey began as an academic, as an activist and a campaigner. And then my first COP was in COP3, which was a very landmark COP because it was a Kyoto COP. So at Kyoto, I was there leading an international environmental organization from many, many different countries. We had more than 60 member organizations. And our job was to bring the voice of civil society to bear.
to make sure that the negotiators were aware of what their populations, they were reflecting their interest through the engagement of civil society organizations, environmental NGOs.
Yeah.
And I have to say that was a very different COP. It was tiny compared to what we have now.
Yes.
You know, we had a few thousand negotiators, we had a few thousand civil society organizations. And over the span of that time, it has grown so much that we had almost 100,000 last year at the UAE COP. And now, of course, this is the second largest COP, 70,000 people.
Yes.
So I didn't stop there. I started my career looking at these issues from a civil society perspective. But then I realized, because I was responsible in the job that I had for addressing the conversation and engaging in the UN conversation in various different fora, at the UN Commission on Sustainable Development, at the World Trade Organization, at the climate summits. And I found that often there was a dialogue of the deaf.
Yes.
Yeah, that there only certain narratives. It was either a government narrative, or it was a business narrative, or a civil society, and parties weren't listening to each other.
Exactly.
And in particular, the voices of the private sector, of small businesses in countries like India were not represented. And so I thought, I'm going to create an organization which focuses not on the West, but on the rest, on how countries like India and China, which are very entrepreneurial people, how those people are involved in this debate, how they can also be raised their awareness about what climate change means for them, for their economic direction.
Exactly.
And so I founded that organization. We were the first ones in India. In 2001 already, we hosted a big conference with business called, it was the first corporate citizenship conference, which was climate neutral. And I remember this was in Calcutta. And people were asking, what does climate neutrality mean? Yeah, so you see that, again, there has been almost a generation of change and transformation. So after then, not to give you my full CV, but just highlights, of course, because I was so active in business, we worked very closely with the UN Global Compact on business to bring in the voices of developing country businesses. You know, I made a film on this, showcasing what corporate leaders were saying and doing to transform their own companies through their supply chains, through improving their practices, through being more transparent. And you see that reflected now in the engagement of businesses from all over the world, and actually the private sector and the Azerbaijani focus, especially through the high-level champion, on the role of the private sector, business and finance and investors and SMEs, is finally bearing fruit in this COP29. But then I have also worked in government. So very unusually for an Indian citizen, I was allowed to work in the UK government, where I had a very senior role, where I was responsible for the UK government's international sustainable development strategies. And I built a whole new platform for engagement with China, with India, with Brazil, South Africa, and Mexico. So that gave me an insight into the reality of how governments work. And for the last 10 years, I've of course been leading Global Legislators, but I've also been very much involved in the city that I live in London, where I've been a commissioner to the Mayor of London for the last 8 years on sustainable development. So you'll see I have worked at multiple levels, many regions. And so it does, I'm very privileged to have a perspective which is quite holistic, which is not from one, you know, civil society perspective or one lens, the private sector, but tries to bring an understanding of how the different stakeholders see an issue and to build consensus-driven models. So that's where we are in COP29. And you asked me, so, you know, what my impressions have been.
Yeah.
So I have to begin with my impression of Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
I came here for the very first time in May. I was delighted to have met yourself at the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union General Assembly, in March this year. And that was the first time. We had only just heard about Azerbaijan because you had the least time of any presidency to organize yourselves.
Yes.
So in March, I remember seeing that video in Geneva in the International Center, Conference Center, and it was quite amazing. I mean, most people had no idea about Azerbaijan, you know, where it is, what the people are like, what the culture is like. And so it was a very impressive introduction, very impressive presentation.
Thank you.
And then I came here in May because Global Legislators within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, we have a special role. We are the focal point within the UN system for parliamentarians. And so we organize the parliamentary pavilion. We make sure that we provide support to members of parliament to understand what the process is about, what the issues are, how the negotiations work, and how they can play a role in their own parliaments. So I came here in May to try and understand what was going on. And that was my first exposure to Azerbaijan. And I was, like everybody who comes here, blown away by the beauty of the city. Baku is an extraordinarily beautiful city.
Yes.
It's a very clean and pleasant city. The people are polite. It's very easy to get around. And for me, what matters most is personal safety. It's a very safe city for women and girls.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And as I always say to anybody who asks me, what would be the number one thing that you would say about Azerbaijan or Baku? I always say, it's the country and the place that I would send my daughters to without the chaperone. Easily, I would say, go, enjoy yourselves. You will be safe, you will be fine. So in May, I had the opportunity also to meet with a number of the officials here and leaders. I also had the privilege of meeting with the high-level champion, with Nigar Arbadaray.
Yes, our colleague.
Your colleague, absolutely, also a member of parliament. We were very excited in Globe when her candidature was announced, that she had been appointed as the first parliamentarian who is a high-level champion.
Yes.
And so we thought that's brilliant, because this is her special superpower, like yours is. Because being a parliamentarian, you can do so much more than the private sector, or civil society, or academia, anybody else, because you have the constitutional mandate, the constitutional authority to act on behalf of your constituents.
Exactly. We are, as the parliamentarians, we are playing a role of bridging NGO, our constituencies, government structures. That's why we have very important role to play. And here I would like to ask maybe Sevil Hanım, your impressions about COP29 session. I know that as a parliamentarians, we have also been involved in the matters since the beginning of the declaration that COP29 session will be hosted in Azerbaijan. I think that this is a very important event and also very good opportunity to introduce our country, to introduce ourselves, because Azerbaijan is really located in the geography that we not only bridge the regional countries, regions around us, but also Azerbaijan is a place where the intersection of civilizations, east, west, north, south. So that's why it is also very important for us, for our country, to host this event because of its geography, because of its multicultural, multi-religious diversity, the richness that our people, our country, our nation has. So I would also like to hear from you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, I was so excited as a citizen of Azerbaijan to hear that COP29 will at least take place in Azerbaijan. For me, it was an amazing news. And as a parliamentarian, first of all, I thought what to do, how to contribute to this biggest event, to make it a real event. And you just mentioned my first presentation in Geneva. And after this presentation, believe me, so I didn't even believe that so many people will come and ask. So it is excellent. So this is absolutely new country, and we are anticipating the contribution, what news you can bring to this very global challenge. And now, when COP29 at least happened, we have only 2 days to end this magnificent event. But now I can say that it was an event, because too many ideas, too many events, and too many initiatives were produced in COP29. And you also attended the panel sessions, the side events which took place within COP29. And each discussion, each deliberation, I think, would bring new initiatives for COP30, because I will ask you to comment on this issue, because you are you have very rich experience with COPs, and you worked with different segments, including parliaments, governments, civil society, maybe law enforcement bodies. But what we need further to bring to COP to make it a real part of our global struggle against the climate changes. First of all, I think we need transparency and control. It is very important because what we today decide and which decisions we make today shouldn't be just words. And I like 29 with this motto, so not words but actions. Cross from words to action, because we speak much more, we discuss, we deliberate, we say, but what we have done, I think this is the most important question that we need to ask, first of all, to ourselves, but then others, so that to make it efficient. And it would be interesting for me to know your experience in this. So words and action, different circles, different parts participating in these processes, their contribution, and how they actually could do their best to bring our global mission to cope with climate change challenges.
Yeah, I would love to respond to that. That's such a good question, because it's also there in the strapline for the presidency, which says enhance ambition and enable action. So we are now in a period almost 30 years after the adoption of the Rio Conventions and the UNFCCC, where this is a period of implementation. So it's not so much the rule setting. Most of the rules were set with the Paris Agreement. Now we are fine-tuning those rules, especially in areas such as the carbon markets, which is where this very controversial article, the Article 6 discussions, they have been stuck for a very long time, because they go to the heart of what rules are set in the country and by international organizations to determine the way in which the private sector works with the country itself. So, but actually, over the course of the last 29 COPs, there has been a more democratization of the COPs. When they first started, they were a very technical gathering of experts. And so even within governments, you had the technical experts who would go there with the lead officials, and then just for the high-level segment, the ministers, and that was it. Because it started out as a very technical attempt to keep emissions within a certain level, to stabilize emissions so that they would not pose a threat to humanity. And then there was a big change around COP14. This was a COP it's the Lima COP in Peru.
Yes.
And at that time, there was a recognition that governments could not deliver on COP commitments by themselves, that you needed a more structured way to enable what we call non-state actors in the UN context. These are non-party actors, non-governmental actors. And there are many different types. There's local government, there's trade unions, there's business, there's civil society, scientists, etc. And so with the Lima COP and COP14, there was a special roadmap for the engagement of non-state actors. And some partners, for example, some local government, the local government constituency within the UN argues that they should also be allowed to put their contributions to climate mitigation, emissions reductions, or adaptation as part of a country's national efforts. So there should be some means of recording that in a national registry. That hasn't quite happened, and businesses are arguing for the same thing. So what we have is delivery, which is not only by governments, delivery is already taking place, especially in the real economy. We see the way in which the green economy has taken off. The clean energy revolution is unstoppable now.
Yes.
So we are seeing all of these economic actors who are playing a role. They're not reflected in the negotiations. And if one only talks about the negotiations, you actually miss where the biggest dynamism is, and that is in the markets.
Yeah.
So now coming up to where we are, this is one of the reasons why there are so many pledges and so many partnerships, is because that is the way forward. And if I can just share some observations on where I think that the Azerbaijani presidency is quite different from what we've seen before. There are a number of respects. So first of all, this is the first presidency where we now have a formal troika working. Yeah. In the past, it was always obvious there's an incoming presidency. They will have that role for a year and a half. There will be somebody after them. So the current presidency will lend a hand. So that was very informal, that handover process. But with this presidency, we now have the formalization of COP28, COP29, and COP30. And that's not just in the procedure, it's in the way in which they relate to each other's initiatives. So, you know, for us on the outside, it's always very challenging. We think, here's a presidency, there's going to be another avalanche of partnerships. Who's going to be monitoring them? Who's going to be responsible for ensuring that they deliver what they set out to do? And so now we do have these delivery mechanisms which have been established, because what this presidency has done very well, it's a very professional, systematic approach, is to see what did the UAE offer? What did the presidency in the UK and Egypt do before then? So I'll give you just 3 examples. Yeah. So we have in local government and urbanization, we had a major initiative which was launched called the Surge Initiative by COP27. And then we had an initiative which was a coalition of high-level champions launched by COP28, the UAE presidency. And so instead of just duplicating all of these efforts, the presidency here said, well, let's bring all these together. Let's have a Baku continuity initiative where we build on what's gone before, what we add to it. And so they have, yesterday morning, they launched the multi-level action, multi-sectoral action pathways for healthy and resilient societies. So this is one area just in the urban sector where they have provided consolidation. They've done the same thing for health. They've done the same thing for finance. So last year we had the first, under the UAE presidency, we had a coalition of business and philanthropy.
Yes.
That was that climate platform. And the Azerbaijani presidency has built on that by having not just business and philanthropy, but investors.
Yeah.
So now we have asset managers who have also pledged to help deliver on the climate ambitions, on the net zero targets, on the NDCs, by bringing 10 trillion in assets, 10 trillion US dollars in assets around the table. So this is huge progress, because it means that you have then a structured way for all of these different actors to contribute. Now, there's much more to say about monitoring and, you know, the reporting and the verification of all of that, which is where members of parliament come in. But these are just some of the advances we've seen.
Ms. Malini, a very important point you have touched. So can we call COP29 a huge
breakthrough
transition in this way? That you just mentioned 3 major milestones that make COP29 special. So can we call it a huge transition?
So I would say that this is a breakthrough COP. And this is a breakthrough COP because we have the action agendas, we have the partnerships, but we have some other things which are happening in the diplomacy, because we are now in a different era. We know that this has been a very challenging COP because the political conditions have been very challenging. But it's been a breakthrough because I think that parties realize they have to come together with a seriousness of intent, because the climate impacts are hitting so hard that in some countries they are affecting 5% of the GDP of a country. So with the combination of the climate impacts affecting every country, with the impact of the science also telling us that time is running out, and with the political recognition, we can't keep waiting for the perfect Goldilocks moment for diplomacy, that this has been a breakthrough in bringing pragmatism to the agenda. And I think that the professionalism, the calmness, the respectful way of engaging with all parties, this has been a hallmark of this presidency. Yes. It's been calm, it's been professional, it's been respectful.
So it's very good to hear from you as an expert who are engaged very closely in the matters of climate issues, to hear that the Baku COP29 conference has been a breakthrough conference. This is very good news also because we have seen for the last years that there are huge discrepancies between the positions of the developed countries on the one hand and developing or least developed countries on the other hand. So it means that at least Azerbaijani conference moved a little bit closer the positions of those global north and global south. At least we have some positive momentum on the horizon that we hope that at least after Baku conference or COP29 session, we will have some positive developments take place, because this is the globe. It doesn't, the global climate action, global climate agenda does not recognize any borders. It's a home for everybody. So nobody is safe until everyone is safe. So it means that these are really good developments. But also I would like to ask, despite increasing awareness, there are some pledges that have not been met yet, unfortunately. So do you think that these pledges that have been promised, have been proposed by developed nations or less developed nations, will be taking a momentum to further develop their ideas, further develop their agenda in order to meet the pledges, in order to meet the obligations that they have taken?
Yeah, so let me put this quite clearly, because this is, of course, the finance COP. Yeah, so there's no getting away from it, that if you read the reports on Saturday, they will be judging this COP as a success or a failure according to whether a finance deal was reached. That will be the litmus test for many. Yeah, and that is very important. But if you only focus on that, then you miss everything else that has been happening.
It's not just like black and white.
It's not black and white, because actually the finance aspect of it is essential, but it is not the only thing that's happening. Yeah, of course, you need to have you need to have national climate plans which are ambitious, and that's the other thing which is being demanded, that in a few months now, 3 months from now, every country is expected to introduce its updated NDC, its national climate plan, with an investment plan.
Yes.
Yeah. And we're not seeing enough countries which are ready to do that. So that's likely to be shifted into later next year. But equally, I mean, if we know that if you have an ambitious NDC, that ambition alone sends a clear signal to the private sector, to donor countries, that you're serious, and then you are much more likely to receive the finance. So there is a relationship between finance and ambition. But just to come back to the issue of the finance goal, we know we've got one more day, and there are many numbers which are, being thrown around about what should the new collective quantified goal be, the NCQG, the new goal after this 100 billion annually, and by 2030. So we have a high figure of 1.3 trillion, which is being demanded by some parties. And other parties are now mentioning, 440 billion, 600 billion, 900 billion. So the quantum of that is under discussion, as well as who is going to be contributing. And that issue about the contributor base is where this pragmatism is setting in. Because we see the dominant role of China. And this is where the climate diplomacy is very interesting to observe. Because China is back in now. We have the minister who's here. And China is already a major contributor to climate finance. Since 2016, China has contributed something like $24.5 billion for climate finance. Annually, on the average, it contributes $4.5 billion to climate finance. But China does not see itself as a Western donor country, as a Annex I contributor, because it's still classed as a developing country. So these are some of the challenges, because there are those who are saying, well, you're no longer a developing country. You are now you are the second largest emitter. Your historical emissions now exceed those of the European Union. So it's now time to recognize that we have a new world in which you have China, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, South Korea, and others who are also contributors. So this is one of the debates which is holding up the agreement on the number, because it is really about who contributes. Yeah.
Yes, who contributes, and also the mechanism on the place to monitor the implementation of this. For example, I remember 2 years ago, a few years ago, there was a flood in Pakistan. It took so many months to deliver, to invite financial aid from different countries. But at the same year, there was a flood in Germany, which just was in a moment collected a big amount of finances in order to help the people. So it means that we have to be very helping, contributing to those nations, to those countries who are lacking the financial resources, who don't have exact mechanism to implement how to deliver, how to collect the financial aid from developing or from the developed countries. So we need a mechanism on the ground to help those people. So Sevil,
yeah, very good point. And I would like to know your opinion also in this matter. So we are speaking about climate financing, which is a big issue and the central issue in COP29. So how do you see, again, the mechanisms or forms of financing? So for me, if we say the national strategy should be worked out and the national state budget need to have special budget in their expenses so that to finance climate actions. So it will be, I think, a little bit complicated, because we have, you know, developed countries, developing countries, and underdeveloped countries. So maybe developed countries will say, okay, and they will have funds in their state budget to finance, but when we are talking about the low income or poor countries, they may say, so it is a great idea, but we do not have funds, sorry. Don't you think it would be great if we create UN climate fund so that to you know, raise funds for this global budget, and then taking account the potential of the country based on the data of the International Monetary Fund, IFC, International IFC, World Bank, and their assessments, and make decisions within the UN which funds should go to these countries, so we can take by countries, because maybe the country have quite big budget, but it has no potential to you know, to transit to green economy, the green electricity production, because sunny days, you know, you need to have alternative energy sources so that to transit and to produce alternative energy. But maybe an African country which is quite poor but has very big potential, isn't it better to help these countries in transition to green economy and to do it within UN? So through this climate fund. So your opinion, please, in this issue.
Yeah, this is a question everyone is discussing in the context of the big finance goal and how you get the money out, which are the institutions. So within the UN system, we already have a quite sophisticated array of multilateral international financial institutions. So we have the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, and they are part of the World Bank system. So you have the Asia Development Bank, the African Development Bank. Here in the region, we have the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I understand that they have now started also investing in Azerbaijan, you know, sustainable cities, etc. So we have this network of banks, and they've already, for the last many, many decades, been invested in the development of the countries who are parties to those agreements. And by and large, these LDCs, low-income countries, middle-income countries, who are their clients. So we have already a pathway through these MDBs, but now what we recognize is that there will never be enough money through overseas development assistance. Yeah, there has to be a role for the private sector. And some people are arguing that actually the overwhelming contribution has to come from the private sector, from private capital markets.
Yes.
So what does that mean for continental Africa? To go to the example that you gave. Because if we just look at solar potential, the continent of Africa has 60% of the world's solar potential.
Yeah.
but it receives 2% of the solar investment. Now, that's for a complex of reasons, but one important reason is that there has to be a very clear political signal from a country that yes, please, we are open for business. We are going to make sure that we have all the elements in place to invite investment from the public banking system as well as from the private investors, which means that we have the right trade investment taxation framework. That takes a lot of work. It means that you have local agencies, local entrepreneurs, local business partners, local government who are ready to absorb that, to play a role. And in too few countries do you see that. But now I think that there is a very clear recognition. I'll give you the example of parliamentarians, since we are here in the Milli Medjlis. So we are working at Globe to support the efforts of parliamentarians in Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, it's one of the mega diverse countries in the world, and they realize that they're in a position where they can sell carbon credits, but they need to establish a credible system, an incredible infrastructure to make sure that when the carbon credits are the arrangements are taking place, that there are mechanisms in place that are transparent, that assure both sides that these are that there is a high integrity in the nature of the functioning of the carbon market. So they are ready and willing. They're already busy working with partners to establish the cap and trade systems, put them in place. So that's the role of members of parliament. They're there to make sure that the policies, the legislation, the legal frameworks are there in place. And it's by investing in those practical means that we can send the signal that yes, this is a country in which the money will be well spent. It reaches the beneficiaries, because both sides have to be satisfied. The people on the ground who are asking, well, like in Pakistan, there have been decades of investment. Invest in prevention so you don't have the floods, not just in emergency relief. So people on the ground are rightfully asking, why is it that my local municipality, my local member of parliament has not protected me? They knew these floods were coming again. And equally from those contributor countries, all of those individuals who pay, who make a donation to when international charities say, look what's happening, they want to be satisfied that their money is reaching the people it needs to. So parliamentarians have a very important role in scrutinizing this, creating the legal frameworks, scrutinizing, making sure that the budgets that are passed are transparent.
In terms of managing the funds, it's very important. Also, just the facts came to my mind. Last year, in 2023, international community pledged to invest $1.7 trillion into the renewable energy sector. Only $10 billion are going to Africa for the solar, to develop the alternative solar energy. So it's a drop in ocean. It's not enough. That's why we, as global legislator like yourself, CEO, as parliamentarians, we have to raise the issue, because equitable, just positions, just attitude towards these issues, also very important in order to bring attention of those who are responsible, also to manage to control the mechanisms and to build up the mechanism how to implement and how to make money going justly to those people who are suffering from the climate change. So these are very important issues. We will keep in touch. We will continue our mission to raise awareness and to help those people who are suffering from the global climate change. This is our home for everybody. Again, nobody is safe until everyone is safe. So thank you very much, Ms. Malini. Thank you very much, Ms. Mekhailova. It has been indeed very important discussion, and we are very honored again to have you here in the parliament, in the premises of the Parliament of Azerbaijan. Looking forward to continuing our cooperation in the future.